One of the things that I find quite fascinating about Mercedes-Benz, considering they were the originators of the motor car, is how long it's taken them to fully embrace electrification. And when they have, it's not been through some genre-defining, bespoke, ground-breaking EV. It's been by converting what they currently do to electric power. The EQA, the EQC, the EQV, the forthcoming EQB and EQG. They're all just converted piston engine cars. Yet every time I drive one, it always makes me realise how good they really are. They're comfortable, they're refined, they're reasonably efficient, they're quite quick. They're everything that an electric Mercedes-Benz should be. So if that's how good they can make a car that was never designed to be an electric car from the start, imagine what they can do with one that was never designed to be anything but an electric car from the start. So welcome to another edition of our sneak peek series. Welcome to the Mercedes-Benz EQS, and of course, as always, welcome to AutoEV. Now, before we get on to this week's sneak peek of the new Mercedes-Benz EQS, it is of course that time where I ask you to do the usual housekeeping of liking the videos, subscribing to the AutoEV channel and pressing the little bell button that's just down below there so you get notified when the next video goes live. And as always, remember, keep the comments flooding in. Now, let's park this to the side for a second. Let's talk about the Mercedes-Benz S-Class for a second, because that's always been the car that sort of previewed what was going to be technology that's coming out on more humble, more normal, everyday cars over the coming decade or so. If you look back through time, it's always previewed those technologies. Electronic ABS, first seen on an S-Class. Keyless Go, first seen on an S-Class. Voice-activated controls, first seen on an S-Class. Radar-guided cruise control, first seen on an S-Class. Crumple zones, first seen on, well, it wasn't an S-Class, it was the S211 Fintail, but basically that was the car that was out before the S-Class. So it's a really important car for, even if it's not within your price bracket, to look at, to know what's going to start coming out. Now, the EQS is Mercedes-Benz's new flagship electric vehicle, but unlike the other cars we mentioned at the start, this isn't based on an S-Class. This is a bespoke EV platform from the ground up. They're first, but it will sit alongside the S-Class as the flagship in the Mercedes-Benz range, sitting at head of the table. So will this start to preview what we're going to see on more, dare I say, humble EVs of the future, just like the S-Class did to those piston engine cars? Well, let's take a look and find out. So as always, let's start with the styling of the car. And as I say, this is not just an electric S-Class, unlike those other cars that we're speaking about earlier, the EQA, the EQC, which are modified from their petrol engine brethren. This sets its own style out, and that style is very much aerodynamics. This is the most aerodynamically efficient car in the world with a drag coefficient of just 0.20 CD. And that, of course, is designed to make it slip through the air as quickly and quietly as possible and maximise that range. But we'll come on to that a little bit later when we're discussing battery sizes. In terms of styling, well, it sets out its own style, as I say. It's not quite as visually imposing and opulent looking as an S-Class. As I say, you can really tell it's that kind of sleek, they've got this one bow thing, which you'll see in the side plan a little bit better, that goes all the way out to the back. This sort of shorter bonnet here is very much a cab forward kind of style. This short bonnet here, which doesn't actually open. There's nothing to see in here. You can't get in there. There's no front trunk thing, boot, whatever you want to call it. It's just closed. It's just a panel. That's it. At the front, you've got these rather nice LED high-performance headlights. Now, in other markets, they're going to have a very clever pixel system that are able to project images onto the road ahead of you. So, for instance, if the car picks things up like pedestrians walking across the road as such through its radar-guided camera on the front, it will then project that image onto the road so you see it first. We can't get that in the UK. If you do want to kind of break the monotony of this front end up, this sort of panel here, what you can have is a little three-dimensional Mercedes-Benz stars embedded into it as well, which kind of quite nice and break it up. This spec isn't probably the most ideal one to be showing you, I have to say, but I am very grateful obviously to Mercedes-Benz World at Brooklands for allowing me to come in here and film with the car today. But yeah, we'll go around spec and things later, but it doesn't really show the car off in its best light. It looks a bit plain, if I'm being honest with you, in this colour and trim. But let's carry on. And it's in its side profile where you really see the influence on the air on the car. And Mercedes-Benz call it a one bow design, where you've got this kind of arc that just goes all the way out from the front right out to the back. And it's very much influenced by aerodynamics, as I say. It's yeah, it's very different to the S-Class in terms of its looks. In fact, it's very different to anything else Mercedes-Benz currently makes. Now, they have shown the EQE, which is obviously going to sit below this car in the range, so the E-Class size car, but again, like the EQS, a bespoke platform with its own design. I get the need for the aerodynamic efficiency, I really do, and I think this spec doesn't really help it. It's a bit monochromatic for me, if I'm being honest with you. But yeah, it's not got quite this sort of like imposing sort of like feature that the S-Class has. Anyway, very aerodynamic wheels on this car. We've got the 5-spoke design wheels with these infills in them as well, again to aid the airflow around the car. These are 21-inch wheels. I think you can go up to about 22-inch on the higher specification. But looking down the side of it, you've got the kind of flush door handles that pop out when you need them, and there's nothing really else extraneous on the body side at all. Let's have a look around the back, because there's another surprise around there. And that surprise is, it's a hatchback, which is quite unique for this style of car, because normally saloons are the order of the day, but as I say, it's to aid with aerodynamic efficiency, and also as well, the big benefit is it gives you a lot of practicality, which we'll come on to in a second. But as far as styling is concerned, it just sort of lacks that kind of visual impact that an S-Class just seems to have. An S-Class pulls up outside and you feel like someone's ordered a hit on you. This pulls up outside and it's kind of feel like someone's ordered an Uber. 610 litres back there, that is. And the split fold rear seat will take that up to 1,770 litres. So certainly enough space for a couple of dead Albanians if that's your bag. You've got a little bit of underfloor storage here for some cables and stuff. And you've got this cover here, a bit disappointing, it's just a kind of vinyl blind. And remember, there's no space up at the front, as I say, that's all to do with electronics to keep this Leviathan running. Forgot to open my own door, it's not so good. Now, let's talk about rear seat space. Because, well, it's vast back here. It's lovely. I've set the seat up for myself, and I'm 5'7", 5'8", and I just have bags of room, but that's kind of what you'd expect for this style of car. It's shorter and narrower overall than the S-Class, but it has the same wheelbase, so it has a really huge amount of cabin space back here as well. And of course there's a lot of light comes into the car. This particular one's got this sort of double sunroof, the blinds on are closed at the moment, but it's a lovely ambience back here as well, that's the other thing, and supremely comfortable. Now there's obviously going to be loads of options that you'll be able to tailor the car with, I'm sure, as it comes out, in terms of, you know, rear seat packages and such like, you know, where you've got screens and all the rest of it. This is an AMG line specification car that we're looking at here, so I hate to say the word basic, but the sort of lead into the range, if you will, so it hasn't got any of that fitted, but that's quite nice because it kind of just shows us the actual space that the car has. We've got obviously the rear climate control system here. You've got pretty much a flat floor, I mean, near as damn it a flat floor there. We've got a nice like armrest there, pop out little tray, yeah, these head restraint cushions, very nice, and the ambient lighting, I have to say, I'm getting on board with that. Peter Stringfell would be proud of this. Now if you think I've just got in the wrong car by mistake, I haven't. This is the standard EQS dashboard. All the other channels that you've seen the EQS on have all showed you the big hyperscreen, the really impressive big dashboard. That's a £7,500 option. Now, if you don't tick it, this is what you get, which isn't really short-changing you in some respects. The car is very clever. There's no doubt about it, it's a Mercedes-Benz. You get these two screens here, a 12.8-inch portrait style screen for your infotainment system and a 12.3-inch landscape one for the driver, and they're just nice and easy to hand. Everything falls easily to hand. This is an AMG line specification, as I say. It's got the sort of AMG steering wheel, the flat bottom one. It's got the physical kind of controls. They look touch sensitive, they're not. They've got to physically press them, which is quite nice. And as I say, all the controls fall easily to hand. There's some shortcut buttons along here which are physical. So for instance, increasing and decreasing volume, muting, switching on and off, hazards, going into the vehicle settings. You want to quickly go in there. You're into your dynamic mode where you go between eco, comfort, sport and individual. Obviously you can set all that up. Interestingly, your climate control is on the screen as well, but it's always on. So it's a bit like the Ford Mustang Mach-E, it's always at the bottom of that screen. So there's no physical climate control buttons. They are the ones on the screen, but they will always be there. Even on the one with the hyper screen, they're always physically there. You don't have to go into like a sub-menu to try and find them. But the car also works off voice activation through Mercedes-Benz MBUX system by just saying things like, "Hey Mercedes." You will ask it to do certain things. So for instance, if you're using a navigation system, you can say, "Hey Mercedes, direct me to London," or "direct me to Monaco," or whatever, and it will find the address for you and set the navigation system up. Cleverly, it will also calculate it based on the car's current charge. The time and distance to go will also take into consideration being the most efficient route, where you're going to charge or need to charge, how long that you may want to charge therefore, and also whether or not those charging bays are actually in use. So it is really clever system to use. The car with the hyperscreen I have used, and we asked it to calculate a route from Weybridge to Monaco, to Monaco, which it did. And it's just under 900 miles from memory, and it had pinpointed where we were going to stop and charge. But interestingly, it wasn't asking us to stop and put a full charge into the car. It was telling us to stop and put a little charge here and then another little charge there. In fact, on the whole trip, it calculated that we would only need to be stationary for just over 1 hour 20 minutes, I think it was, which is pretty impressive. Now we're going to get on to range and stuff in a second. But if you think about it, an 800 odd mile journey, and the car reckons we're only going to be stationary for an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half to charge, that's pretty decent. Anyway, I'm getting away from the actual car itself. What else have we got here? Well, as I say, the heating and ventilation controls are they always kind of stay on. They are there. The navigation's nice and clear. Obviously, if you're using the infotainment, it's up there too. Storage, yep, you've got plenty of that. There's a big bin here with some wireless charging, 2 USBs and C's and some cup holders there. There's another big bin in here. Lose a child in if you really feel like it. A couple of USB ports in there. There's a massive big storage area underneath here, which you can't see with the camera angle, where you can drop stuff into, and good door bins. The ambient lighting in the car, as I say, is lovely. It's one of the nicest that you can see, and it's got some ridiculous amount of combinations that you can have in it. It's just weird. The seats themselves are beautifully comfortable, as you'd expect from a flagship Mercedes-Benz, and they are fully adjustable, including these kind of head restraints which kind of move in and out depending obviously on how you want them, and they just kind of cause it the back of your head. You can get a really nice driving position in the car, and there are obviously various different options, such as most of the cars get heated seats or ventilated seats. You can have a vegan free leather interior, you can have different sort of like wood up here depending obviously on the specification of car you choose. Now let me just go on to the hyper screen again for a second, because I say what I'll now do is put up some B-roll of it so you can actually see it. And I have used it, and a lot of people maybe think that it is just absolute overkill. It is and it isn't. It's 3 separate screens. It's not one massive big screen, but they're embedded into the dashboard to make it look like one screen. And the one in front of the passenger will only actually operate if someone's sitting in the passenger seat. So for instance, if you had a front passenger who wanted to, I don't know, listen to a little bit of music or take their phone call on a Bluetooth headset, you can do that so that, if they're in the seat, they can set all that up. If they're not there, then that screen isn't on. It just goes blank and you get a kind of pattern up on it. So it doesn't, it sounds worse than it actually is. What it is a massive magnet for fingerprints. That's the only thing I will say. Now, is it going to be an important option to have? Now, let's talk about the car from a used car perspective, which might sound odd when we're discussing a brand new car that's not out yet. But there are certain things on certain cars, as an ex-car salesman, I know that you should have to sort of aid the residual value of the car. E46 BMW M3s always needed to have 19-inch wheels with them, even though they drove better on the 18s. Early 996 model 911s, again, came with 17-inch wheels as standard. Everyone wanted 18-inch turbos. The very, very early Aston Martin DB9s, it didn't have sat-nav, as rubbish as it was. You just needed to have them. The Vanquish didn't have rear seats as standard. Two-seat Vanquishes didn't really sell particularly well. Is the Hyperscreen going to be one of those options that's going to be a must-have, you know, a must-have tick on the order form? Well, let's be honest, this is not going to be a cheap car. As I say, we'll come on to pricing a bit later, but the starting price is £100,000. So you've got to ask yourself, is another £7,500 on top of that worth spending to get that big imposing screen? And is it going to help it when it comes to moving the car on as a second-hand car? Only time will tell, but I have a funny feeling it is going to be one of those must-have things. But don't feel shortchanged if you don't decide it and you get the standard dashboard, because it works really well, everything's in the right place, and the other thing about it is it's typical Mercedes-Benz qualities. Everything feels really well screwed together and it feels like it's going to last an absolute lifetime of the car. Now, the EQS uses the largest capacity battery currently available on any production car at just over 107 kilowatt hours, meaning according to WLTP figures, you could possibly get up to 453 miles on a full charge depending on specification. The car will also take charging speeds of up to 200 kilowatts, meaning you can go from 10 to 80%, and of course that usual 31 minutes. But that's not the figure that really impresses me, because if you were to find one of those ultra rapid chargers, you can add 186 miles of range in just 15 minutes. Now that's the figure I think we should really be concentrating on. I think too many people now think that when you stop at a charge, you've got to add in the full charge to the car, and that's what takes the time. Do we always do that if we were doing it in a petrol or diesel car? No, sometimes you go and you put 30 quid's worth in or 40 quid's worth in. Maybe that's what we should be looking at in terms with these cars as well, not necessarily adding in that full charge all the time. Interestingly, as I said, that trip to Monaco that we did with the Hyperscreen car, that's exactly what it was doing. It was calculating it based on sort of small, short chargings to get us on our way and to be really quite efficient with our time. So it's quite clever the way that it does that. Anyway, back to charging, for instance. If you were to charge it from an 11 kilowatt wall box, you're looking at just around about the 10 to 11 hours. If it's a 7 kilowatt wall box you've got, then to top up this big battery, it's closer to 15 hours. Now, as I say, we're obviously going to have to wait until we can subject the car to the full AutoEV road test before we can deliver a verdict on its performance and its handling. But here's some numbers just to kind of whet your appetite. The car that we've got here is the 450 Plus, which has 329 brake horsepower. There will also be a 580 model, which is a dual motor car, so all-wheel drive, with over 500 brake horsepower. There's also going to be the EQS 53, which is the first AMG electric car, which is going to obviously be quite exciting. And that's going to have 761 brake horsepower, which will be enough to scamper this heavy Leviathan to 60 miles an hour in just over 3 seconds. Now, the car will also be able to be had with 4-wheel steering, which should help with manoeuvrability. So the rear wheels will counter steer at low speed manoeuvres to make the turning much tighter in turning circles and sort of like short, sort of like tight spaces. And at higher speeds, they will steer in the same direction as the front to aid with stability on lane changes. So as I say, some really clever stuff on the car. Now, of course, none of this is going to be inexpensive. The AMG line car we have here starts the range off at £100,000, and that goes through AMG line Premium and AMG line Premium Plus. You then have luxury and then exclusive luxury models, which top the range off at £114,000. Now, bear in mind that's what the 450 Plus that we're talking about. The 580 model that's coming on stream, the dual motor car, that's going to add a bit of premium to that. And the AMG EQS 53 that we were talking about, well, prices haven't been announced yet, but I can't see you getting much change out of £140,000 for when that car does arrive on the scene. And of course, in terms of competition for the EQS, well, it's pretty much sitting there all on its own at the moment. Tesla Model S is a slightly smaller car, and it's probably going to compete more with the EQE, the smaller E-Class sort of like sized EQ model that's going to be coming out soon. So yeah, it's probably going to be competing with things like its own brethren, the S-Class, for your attention. Maybe the Porsche Taycan, but to be honest with you, I doubt it, because this is much more luxurious, where the Taycan's much more sports orientated. But it's not going to stay that way for long, because let's remember, BMW are already readying the i7, their all-electric 7 Series limousine. And Bentley and Rolls-Royce, well, they've stated their intent of moving into this market space because, let's be honest with you, electrification is really going to suit luxury travel because, of course, it provides absolute silence and proper refinement. So yeah, so don't expect it to have the place all to itself for too long. The EQS is a really big deal for Mercedes-Benz. It's its first bespoke EV platform. Obviously, it's not going to be its last. And much like the S-Class that it sits alongside, that's always provided the kind of benchmark for that top flight luxury transportation, I think the EQS is going to carry that torch on as Mercedes-Benz moves even closer towards full electrification. Now obviously, as I said, we're going to have to wait until we subject the car to a full AutoEV road test before we give you our definitive verdict on the car. But so far with this first sneak peek that we've had, it certainly impresses in terms of its battery, its potential range and refinement, if leaving us a little bit cold on its design. Thank you once again for joining us at AutoEV. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel, pressing the little bell button down below so you receive notification of when the next video goes live. And as I say, remember, keep those comments flooding in. Remember, we're on all social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter, so be a love, go and follow us there as well. And if you haven't been to it, please head over to autoev.co.uk where you'll see a host of road test review libraries just waiting there for you. Once again, thank you, and we will see you soon. So, you've watched our video. It's now my job to tell you to like and subscribe, and press the little bell button to receive notification of when our next video is uploaded.